You've kicked off a project, but before long you're seeing that there are issues that weren't accounted for in the scope. You can see that the process is being followed and the team's technical abilities aren't in question, but there's something that was left out of the project plan. My name's Josh Moree, this is PMP Flow, and this episode is How to Manage Risk. Risk management is one of the 47 project management processes in the PMBOK. And if you're looking to become PMP certified, it's certainly something you have to become acclimated with. And even if you're not pursuing your PMP certification, understanding risk management is a must for any organization, especially ones that do projects. The PMBOK guide defines risk management as an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on a project's objective. What surprises most people in risk management is that risk is not just necessarily a negative event that can occur, but it's also an opportunity that you can take advantage of. An example of this could be when a regulation gets put into place. Think of December 2004 when PCI DSS went into effect. If you were in the hospitality industry, it was a nightmare to figure out what you had to do. However, if you were in the POS industry, this was a gold rush, as businesses led merchants into becoming compliant. For the sake of this episode, we'll discuss events and conditions that have a negative effect on your organization or your project. And if your organization is not conducting any sort of risk assessment, then you're putting yourself in a bad situation. Projects can run over, thus putting the project's integrity at stake, as well as the integrity of your organization. Keep in mind that the PMBOK's approach to risk is a basic framework, and every organization will have to customize their own risk management. But as always, remember to be flexible as technology becomes more complex, as business needs changes, or as things like regulations change. Risk becomes identified through various methods, like lessons learned from previous similar projects. Once risks are identified, they're put into a risk register and project plan. And there's multiple tools and techniques that you can use for identifying risks. Documentation reviews, like lessons learned. Information gathering techniques, like pre-scope discoveries. Assumption analysis. Diagramming analysis, like cause and effects diagrams. Expert judgment, like subject matter experts. Brainstorming, like team collaboration. Once you identify the risk, you can update them in your project management plan, which must be created before the project kicks off. And don't forget, which is to say to remember, update your project management plan and sub-processes like risk management through the project's lifecycle. Risks are not only identified in the beginning of a project, but through regular update meetings, you may find more risk as the project progresses, or you may find that previously recognized risks become obsolete. Now that we've identified risks, how do we proceed with determining which risks we should actually include with our project, and what are the likelihood of these risks actually occurring? There's two ways to analyze risks, one being qualitative risk analysis and the other being qualitative risk analysis. There's a great section of an article on projectriskmanagement.com I'd like to share with you that defines this quite well. In a nutshell, quantitative risk analysis uses available, relevant, and verifiable data to produce a numerical value, which is then used to predict the probability of a risk event outcome. Qualitative risk analysis, on the other hand, applies a subjective measurement of risk occurrence likelihood against the potential severity of the outcome to determine the overall severity of a risk. To simplify that even further, a quantitative risk analysis uses numerical values to help predict probability, while a qualitative risk analysis uses subjective means from you and your team to identify probability. Whichever your approach is, ensure that you and your team have done your diligence to find the most probable risk that could affect your project. Now that you've documented and analyzed your risks, what's next? As I mentioned earlier, there are positive risks and negative risks, but for the sake of this episode, we're only going to look at negative risks. In risk management, according to PMBOK, there are 4 ways that you can respond to risk: avoid, mitigate, transfer, and accept. Let's dig further into that. Avoid. Risk avoidance is the risk response strategy where the project team acts to eliminate the threat or protect the project from its impact. This is the ideal response to negative risk. How can we just remove the risk from the project? An example of this would be that you're a project manager of a construction company. In the Bahamas, you're set to do construction at the beginning of hurricane season. Hurricanes are certainly a risk to your organization. However, you decide to change the schedule to 6 months down the road where the risk of a hurricane doesn't exist anymore, thus avoiding the risk. Transfer. Risk transference is a risk response strategy whereby the project team shifts the impact of a threat to a third party, together with ownership of the response. More simply said, you're putting the risk in someone else's hand. Let's go back to the analogy of where you're the project manager of the construction company in Bahamas, and it's hurricane season. Well, another option to transfer the risk is that you can take out an air insurance plan. So if a hurricane does occur, that your materials are covered and the wages for your employees are covered. Thus, at least the financial risk is no longer your responsibility. Mitigate. Risk mitigation is a risk response strategy whereby the project team acts to reduce the probability of occurrence or impact of a risk. How can we lessen the effect or severity of a risk if it was to occur? Think of our construction job example. We avoided the risk by moving it 6 months down the road. Well, what if that's not an option in this case? What if a way to mitigate the option is to set our start date 4 months down the road and our major deliverables were 2 months after that? We're not completely avoiding the risk, but if the hurricane was to occur, we're mitigating the effect. Accept. Risk acceptance is the risk response strategy whereby the project team decides to acknowledge the risk and not take any action unless the risk occurs. Sometimes you may exhaust all possible options and find that accepting the risk is your best solution. In the case with a construction project, you may have to accept that a hurricane could occur during your project. But it's very important that you come up with contingency plans on what you do if that risk does occur. Keep in mind that a good project manager understands that he or she may not have all the answers in responding to risks. However, he or she can lead the team to creative solutions in order to keep the project on track. That's it on risk management. I hope you've learned how you can implement risk management into your organization and process. If you want to learn more, the PMBOK is an excellent source for learning about risk. Additionally, PMI offers a learning track for those interested in becoming a risk management professional. Learn more about that at pmi.org. Leave comments, ask questions, and remember, there are no obstacles, only undiscovered solutions. See you next time.